All right. Well, very pleased to welcome to Opening Arguments leading voice in immigration abolition and someone who has helped me understand my own views on the subject for the last few years, Silky Shah, Executive Director of the Detention Watch Network. Welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Just before we get into it too much, your career is pretty much exactly the same age as ICE. It's about, you started, is that right?
Yeah,
Like within a month or two?
Yeah, I
of ICE?
graduated from college in 2003, and I've
Did you and ICE go to rival schools? And then ICE was like, ICE is the Slytherin, and you're the, I don't know.
So that's pretty unique. How did that get going? That you just immediately came out of the gate fighting an agency that was just born?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Texas and in Houston, and I was in school in college at the University of Texas at Austin when 9/11 happened. It was a very I don't know, I've been thinking about this. It was a time when people were very active on college campuses. And, I was in Texas where there was a lot of work around against the death penalty. There was these anti-corporate campaigns and a lot of other things happening. And then 9/11 happened, and so much attention shifted towards the war in Afghanistan and eventually the war in Iraq. But I was doing all this work around prisons and detention on campus, doing education. And I got this job from my first job doing organizing. Initially it was based in New York, but they were like, maybe we should move this to Texas because that's where we were essentially seeing this prison boom at the border. So so much of it was what was happening there because of, both ICE being created and also this sort of, that often when we talk about the war on terror, it's really about that injection of resources into, U.S. militarism. But the war on terror, the domestic war on terror, really operated through the criminal legal system. So one of the big prisons that we were fighting was a U.S. Marshals jail that exists now for immigrants who are both in civil and criminal proceedings. And so there was all these intersections, and a lot of it was happening at the border, and a lot of it was central. Texas was ground zero. It had the most attention. And so, yeah, that's how that happened.
And you had a journalism degree at that point, is that right?
Yes, I did.
So, and just to be clear with everybody, you're not a lawyer and never have been.
No, I'm not a lawyer. I love that I have a journalism degree. I'm like, who knows that about me? That's
do my
hilarious.
research. I just was very curious how you came to this, because you have had such a committed, consistent career just in what you're doing right now, which is fighting ICE and talking about this stuff way before I think most people were. And did your journalism background give you some indication of what was going on? Were you already plugged into these issues before you came to college, or?
Yeah, I was, because like I said, there was a lot of people supporting student organizing, which is what I ended up doing when I left college. It was and in the way I thought about it, a lot of it was around, hey, let's have this campaign against Sodexo Marriott, which was, in the board of Corrections Corporation of America. Eventually we had this campaign against Lehman Brothers. So it was really great when Lehman Brothers went down, but against Lehman Brothers because they were, this higher education bond underwriter. And there was this relationship between all these universities. So we're like, this is the way we can inject a little bit of understanding of all these connections. But for me, I think a lot of it was just getting students to care about this stuff, see what power they might have at the university, but also what are they going to do when they leave the university? What's their role? How can they organize, whether they do it for work, which is what I do, or not? There's a role for all of us to play.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it was very different back then. And I appreciate in your recent book, Unbuilt Walls, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit, kind of the holistic view you're giving of the past. And obviously, when I keep saying 23 years, immigration detention, immigration arrests, INS all existed before 23 years ago. But right now we're talking about ICE, of course, and the immediate fight to abolish it and, do anything better. But, kind of just before we really get into it, how's your perspective right now on our current moment? How are you feeling? I know that's a lot, but
I mean,
what an impolite question to ask, man. I'm sorry.
Hey, people ask me that all the time. So.
I'm curious how y'all are feeling. I just, it's absolutely terrifying. It's unbelievable. I think it's, there have been 6 people who've died in detention since January 3rd of 2026. We're in the last 17 days.
Including at least one homicide that we know of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and suicide, like it's just, it's wild to have been fighting this thing. Like you're asking all these questions, Matt, about doing this work in 2003. Nobody knew what detention was.
Exactly.
Like when I started doing this work, I think a lot of people were like, oh, you work on Guantanamo. I'm like, well, no, not really. But like, yes, there are connections here. And even more now that feels so present. But I think nobody knew. There wasn't like, now there's much more of a sort of civil society infrastructure, like doing work around immigration or detention generally. That didn't exist in the same way it does now. And so at the time, we were trying to get people to pay attention to what was happening. And I think it was confusing for a lot of people. Detention is sort of a confusing, it's still very confusing to people. And now it's become like, for years, we've been saying like, if we don't stop this, it's just going to grow exponentially. And to now see this, and similarly with ICE, it's like they're like, so much of the argument and the thing I constantly push is like, if we're always going to accept that some immigrants, like accept the dehumanization of immigrants, like it's going to open up space for this to happen to not just more immigrants, to more people generally, which is what we've seen in the last few weeks. And so I think I'm pretty terrified. And at the same time, there is this sort of on the abolish ICE front, like a lot of people are like, oh, 2018 was a blip, whatever, like that failed. It was kind of which is really obnoxious. Because from my perspective, I mean, yes, there was this really annoying thing where it was this, Sean McElwee, this like white dude. Everyone's like, he's the guy who started. And it's like, shut up. But
nobody thought of getting rid of ICE before.
Nobody thought of it before. And in this tweet like started, it's like, get over yourself. But for me, like so much of what we were seeing was that all these local communities, like these organizers on the ground or activists on the ground who are like, I want to do something. That was their moment when they started to understand the role of, detention and these contracts, and also 287G programs, which are the ICE police collaborations, and started to really intervene. And they kind of, not everybody was doing things forever, but there was like a contingent of folks who came in then that are, DWN members now, or a member of our organization. And we really built up and were prepared more in 2020 when there was all these openings. We were like, oh, okay, like, let's go. Let's like win some campaigns. So I think I'm thinking about both, like I'm terrified and I'm just like really inspired by just seeing the incredible organizing and defense networks and everything that's happening in Minneapolis. And it's happened in so many other parts of the country. I think I just am trying to hold on to that. So I don't know. I did that. So I started this last year, but I was watching an episode of Eyes on the Prize, which is like the civil rights documentary from back in the day, last night on MLK
I watched
Day.
that in 8th grade.
Exactly. But it's like, it just puts everything in perspective. You're like, okay, like we can talk about these times as if they're unprecedented. Sure, they're unprecedented, but let's like actually, not that long ago, like conditions were quite bad for large categories of people in this country.
Yeah, really, that has been my lesson as the kind of the privileged idiot of this, is like growing up with this view, this sheltered view of like end of history, well, we dealt with all that stuff, in the 60s and all that. And then like now seeing it as more of one continual thing, just one continual fight. Like it really has been an adjustment to realize like, oh, it's not just a matter of what white people are focusing on. Like this fight's been going on this entire time. And I'm kind of the uninitiated when it comes to this. Obviously, Matt knows both from his work experience and from reading your book, but I wanted to make sure as a stand-in for the listener, what do you mean when you say they were building up border prisons? I think you said like right around 9/11. I don't know anything about that. Could you expand on that a little bit? Like, is that's been going on since literally then?
Yeah, it's been going on before then. So, I mean,
Sure.
The modern detention system as we know it largely started to take shape in the early 1980s. So, like, a lot of what I argue in the book and a lot of, I think, the sort of thing I'm trying to push is that the growth of immigration detention is very much tied to the growth of mass incarceration. They're not like separate things that happened.
They're like another branch of the business model kind of thing. Like
yeah. And I think
yeah.
that business model, I think people often place it on private prisons, which is absolutely true. But it's also just these like, it's the federal government, it's these state and local, like especially local county jails, like all of them play a role in this. And so, for a long time, like, I mean, basically since the 50s to the early 80s, often when people would go into detention, they'd be in there for a day or two, and then they'd like be released on their own recognizance and be able to like go through their immigration proceedings, like while they could still like be with their family or work if they could work. And then in the early 1980s, that started to change and the system started to grow. And so, one of the big sort of shifts that happened was actually 5 years before 9/11 in 1986, which I'm sure Matt knows very well. And any immigration lawyer can probably go on and on about 1996. But,
Yep.
and, Detention Watch Network, our organization, started in 1997, sort of in response, where you had these two laws passed that basically expanded the set of crimes called quote unquote aggravated felonies that don't have to be an aggravated or a felony in the immigration, it doesn't have to be either. But that meant people were just like sort of fast tracked to deportation. They no longer had the right to due process. And it also like made people feel trapped in the US. Like people, if they like left the US, then they could have a bar to reentry for long periods of time. And so it sort of ended up doing both expanding the detention system and deportations for especially asylum seekers and legal permanent residents, and then growing the undocumented population at the same time. So both of those things are happening. 9/11 happens, and you get this like injection of like political will and institutional support, the creation of DHS. And so all these things are happening at the same time. And like I said before, I do really think one of the things that happened, and the reason why I was fighting this prison at the border, was because they started, like, this is the point where you start seeing immigration crimes become the number one crime in the federal courts. And so this is in 2004, that's when they become the number one crime. And it's for people who are entering the country without documentation. So you can be in the US without documentation and it's not considered a crime. But if you, I mean, Matt, you know all this. If you come, like if you enter without documentation, you could get up to 6 months in jail. If you do it twice, you can get up to 18 months, 2 years in federal prison. And so that like number starts to go up, and actually all those immigration crimes just skyrocket because they have more border patrol. They have more people targeting people for criminal prosecution. So all like these are sort of parallel systems where it's like, yes, people are in quote unquote civil immigration detention where they're going through their sort of immigration deportation proceeding. And then, there's these layers of punishment. Like once somebody's done, if they get prosecuted, then they end up in detention afterwards and then they get deported. And if they try to come back, they could end up in detention for another 2 years, 5 years longer, or in prison, and then go to detention again. It's just this kind of cycle that starts to happen, and it just grows both systems and more people, and which means more prison beds.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Well, that's kind of like what, like how much capacity did they have, and like roughly, and like how has that increased? Has that boomed like prisons and stuff?
Yeah, so like pre-96, it was like some like 7,000-8,000 like people on it like any given day. Like that was roughly the capacity. After 96, like in 98, it was about 15,000. So you see this really big shift because of 96. And then around pre-9/11, it was about 20,000. Right now, 73,000. It's like the highest it's ever been.
They've never had more. And actually, I'm sure you saw today, and I'm sure you've been following the funding bill that looks like it's on its way now. So we should probably talk about that. Because I didn't see the exact number, but they're authorizing, of course. They did reduce some of ISIS funding. They gave them like a very minor haircut, I think. But
I mean, not quite.
Not really.
I actually, I'm like, our policy person was sending us messages about this, and I am like, it's like they think they're reducing, but they're not actually doing anything quite significant. I mean, for ICE custody operations, it's going from 3.43 billion to 3.84 billion. And ERO, which is detention, enforcement and removal operations, it's 5.08 to 0.45. So there's still a little bit of an increase happening, actually.
Of course.
Which is always the way it is. It's like a ratchet. So they do this
Right.
thing. This is often it. It's like, oh, we're just going to overspend, or we're going to have more people in detention. And it makes the case to members of Congress, which has included both Republicans and Democrats, that they need to raise the amount over and over again. So that's, yeah.
And you reminded me in the book, I actually put this together, but like exactly how they were doing it. But I remember when they were doing this, the DHS would report back at the end of the year because they'd moved money around. Like they'd take money from the asylum office and give it to ERO for enforcement, right? And then just tell Congress that's what they were doing, and then use that as the new baseline for ERO. And I just like, there's so many different ways to lie with numbers here. And to play with it and to pretend that you need that much money. And now, of course, we should talk about this. They're going to have more money than they're literally going to know what to do with, I think.
I mean, it's why, like, I have this piece at some point coming out in Truth Out, but like, to me, when I think about this last year, the funding bill, like you can talk about all the horrific things that have happened on immigration, so many horrific things, which, the transfers to Sakkot, or like the student detentions, et cetera, et cetera. But like, to me, the thing that was really the turning point was the funding bill in July. Like, no question. And from my perspective, I mean, $170 billion, it's gargantuan amounts of money. But I think about this, and I'm curious, Matt, if you like also think about it this way. Like, I remember the moment. So in 2013, there was this moment under Obama where there was a potential for comprehensive immigration reform, and the Senate bill passed. And the only way it passed is that they added this $46 billion border surge amendment. So it felt like, it feels like, there is a sort of history to these things that build on each other. And I think that's what's so scary, is that, obviously no Democrats voted for that bill last summer, but that those years and years of this sort of like bipartisan support have kind of gotten us to this place.
Well, but at the same time, Democrats, of course, as we know, voted for Laken Riley last January, and
100%.
before Trump came in, they handed it to him, and I still can't forgive.
55 Democrats.
It's just and all you're doing, and ICE at the time comes to Congress and says, you can't pass this because we won't be able to mandatorily hold everybody. We can't hold everybody this would be subject to, right? And so what do? Give them more money. That's how it works. And the chart, you're right. It is. I think it is overall the most horrific thing. And it's also, it's kind of like climate change. Like, we just know it's coming. It's just there. It's on the horizon.
Yeah.
It's been
and they barely spend any of the money yet. You know, I mean, already they have 22,000 ICE agents compared to 10,000. It's wild.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just, and I think, I mean, I don't know how you're feeling about this, but it just seems to me like Minneapolis and Chicago and the others have been a preview of what they want every American, especially Blue City, to look like. Is that kind of, I mean, how's it feeling there?
Well, so this is, going back to this sort of like intersection, like the way that ICE operated for so many years and was able to bring deportations up to over 400,000 in the Obama years was through these ICE police collaborations. There's a 287G program, which gives local police the sort of authority to be immigration enforcers. There's, various digital programs like Secure Communities that had a fingerprinting system within jails. And then they have this thing called they've changed, I don't know, the name has changed a lot, the quote, criminal alien program or criminal apprehension program, whatever we're calling it now, where ICE officers are in county jails and like bringing people in. So for a long time, this like local counties and like sheriff's departments and county jails were the gateway to the deportation pipeline. Like, that's for the most part. Yes, people were being picked up. Yes, there were raids. And especially this is sort of the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Right? Republicans love the raids and the sort of criminalization. Right. And Democrats were like, oh, let's make this like more effective and efficient by going through the criminal legal system. And with all these sanctuary policies, deportations started to go down. Like, they had a huge, huge impact on bringing deportations down. But now Trump is like, this is where, these sanctuary places have become like the site of the attack, and like where he can kind of, and now bringing ICE agents up this much, like to 22,000, it's like they're essentially like his occupying army, right? Like and so I think, I think the question, I mean, it's been so many places, from Los Angeles to Chicago to Portland to now Minneapolis. Like so I think, I think that's what's so hard about this moment, is like, we're just in year one. Like, where does this go from here? And
we're all feeling it.
Yeah.
But on a more positive note, I think this is actually a good time to talk about Detention Watch Network and the many wins that your organization has secured, and the ways that you work with organizers and activists on the ground. Because I know that a lot of our listeners want to get more involved and want to do more against ICE where they live, and we've got people all over. And one thing in your book that I thought you detailed really well, that I think is very inspirational, is what you call the site fights, where you take it to the ground, you take it to the places where they're going to put new detention facilities or where they can cancel contracts. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about some of your favorite examples of ways that communities have fought back and been able to keep those, because that is certainly coming. We've got promises of massive new detention facilities that keep floating different places, including potentially up here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, the New Hampshire warehouse.
Yeah, unimaginably large. I can't imagine. But how do those fights happen? How do they work? What's been working?
The what's been working question is hard right now, I'll be honest. Sure. And I say this a lot, like there was, as you mentioned, I've been working against detention roughly for 23 years. And there was like a 10-year period where we just like lose every campaign. Like we're just constantly losing campaigns. And then all of a sudden there were openings. There was openings for a few reasons. I think it was like, very conjunctural. Like it was a combination of many years of Trump or having several years of Trump's attack on immigrant communities, the pandemic, and then also the uprisings for Black Lives, the George Floyd summer. Like those things all helped us start to get to a place of like, oh, actually, maybe we can push a little bit further. So on these campaigns, I think there's so many inspiring ones. I'll point to Illinois, which I think still remains it's so critical to me that Illinois won its fight, because thinking about what happened in Chicago, if there were a detention center in Illinois right now, like it would have been so much worse. It would have been so much easier for them to bring more people into the system. And that's the thing that people don't realize about detention. They think about it as like, it's hard for people to think about it. It's like far away. People don't totally understand it, but it helps facilitate deportation. Like you have detention beds. It helps them pick up more people to then put into deportation proceedings. And so it's an important piece that for some years would drive deportations. Right now, I think deportations are being driven because of the Trump administration. But for a long time, it was a very even the private prison companies said this after 9/11. There was it's an if you build it, they will come mentality. And it was true, because both the private prison companies and these local counties, whether it was a local jail or private prison, were getting revenue from having these beds in their community, whether it was $1 a day or they're having some lucrative contract with the federal government. There's this symbiotic relationship. And so a lot of our strategy, because all of ICE detention is outsourced for the most part, there's only 5 owned and operated facilities, ICE owned and operated facilities. Right. Everything else is county jails and private prisons. Now we're seeing more federal prisons be used, but that's sort of another story. So what we did, we started to bring folks together in terms of these site fights. And with Illinois, a lot of what they did was really look locally. It was in Joliet, there's this community that's fighting. Oh, here's another community. And it was basically became this incredible game of whack-a-mole, where I think there was 8 or 9 sites over several years, all over near Chicago, also in Gary, Indiana, and other places, where at every single place, they were we want a 1,000-bed detention center, or we want to start using this county jail, or we want to start doing XYZ. And a combination of support from people in Chicago, incredible organizers, incredible organizing there from the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, the National Immigrant Justice Center, so many incredible organizations, organized communities against deportations. They would connect, and then we would try to figure out how to support. And it would be in one place, I remember it was just my friend Fred Tsao, who worked on these campaigns, he was just oh, this father and son just got really excited and want to fight it. And you have a town that's pretty small. You can have a small number of people really fight back. And so it was just years of them kind of playing this game of whack-a-mole. And eventually, finally, one town, they couldn't do it. And I think it was Dwight. And they basically were no, we're going to get this private prison in here. We're going to get $1 a day for every person who's detained here. This is going to be great revenue for the county. And then the state legislature actually decided to end the use of private prisons for they were no private prisons for immigration detention. So that all together was no detention in Illinois. And obviously they circumvent our wins. They do everything they can to kind of figure out other ways. They're building in Indiana, Michigan. But at the same time, again, these like raids in Chicago could have looked really different if they still had detention in Illinois, right? So I think there's just I think that's a really important story.
Sorry, can I ask, how does the law of that work? Like, it isn't just like the federal government can just be like, we're doing this because we're the federal government. Like, how does that go?
Doesn't want them to build a private prison. They're not going to build a private prison. And certainly the municipality has to sign off on permitting. And that was kind of my point at the beginning of this Trump administration, especially, was that I think there's a lot of leverage, and certainly Silky would know a lot more about this than me, but a lot of leverage to go to town councils and just say, you know, like, make them meet the letter of the law and everything. I mean, I think about the Burlington field office here in New England. They snuck in a detention facility. They didn't they're in a nondescript office park next to the mall. And of course, as there is in every field office, there's a tiny little holding cells or set of holding cells. They never told the town council they were going to be holding people there, like in a jail. They just didn't tell them it was going to include one. And by the time they found that, it was too late, right? And that kind of stuff with more eyes on it. But that was back before anybody was really watching. And the reason I was really excited to talk to you, I mean, lots of reasons, but one of them is just this moment right now when it feels like so many things could be possible. As you said, it's pretty dark, but the numbers on people being willing to say that they don't want ICE to exist, and the numbers of people just showing up for their neighbors right now in so many different places in so many different ways, that's what's giving me hope right now. So it's exciting to hear about these campaigns and how they've worked in the past. I wanted to come back to something, actually, Jay, you mentioned in your book I actually hadn't heard before. I feel like I should have known this, but you mentioned that they actually offer discounts basically for a certain number of people. Remember the numbers on that? It was
who's offering a discount for what?
It's like
prisons.
a coupon. It's like this thing called, they have like guaranteed minimums and then tiered pricing. So
tiered pricing,
guaranteed minimums, it's sort of just like, I live in Washington State. There's a detention center here, the Northwest Detention Center. It's a GEO group facility. And so they're like, ICE is like, we will always pay you for at least like 1,100 people to be detained there, even if it's lower than that. But that incentivizes ICE to be like, let's make sure at least 1,100.
Get our money's worth. Yeah.
And so then what they do then is have tiered prices.
It's like ICE has a gym membership that it's not using enough. God damn it. Like, I gotta go. I gotta make use of this. I'm paying this amount.
I mean, look, that's why, like
the mentality, like it's.
Well, that's like my colleague. I remember calling tiered pricing a coupon, and I was like, it's so messed up to think about it that way, but that's really what it is. It's basically, so the tiered pricing is like anything over 1,100, ICE gives GEO gives ICE a discount on those numbers above. So that's the thing. There's all these, and that was one of the things that really happened in the first Trump administration. They just like expanded the guaranteed minimums. Like it went up and up and up. So like it went from like 15,000 beds guaranteed to like 30,000 beds guaranteed, so like, and then those things just become much more permanent whenever those things are baked into the contract.
That's right. And as you said, when it's near a major urban area, they have every reason to not discriminate about, well, I mean, obviously discrimination is baked in, but to not even really think about, the categories of people or who they're coming after. Like if you have all of those beds available, you're going to fill them. And, it's just like you build a 6-lane highway, you're going to get 6 lanes of traffic, right? It just sort of seems to be how it works. And I think people really do understand that. I really appreciate the point you made, because we're thinking so much right now about the point of arrest. But I do think we got to keep the focus on where these people are going and how it's working and where it's not. And I guess I wanted to ask you, since you're talking about the force multipliers of the 287G agreements, which have been huge. And obviously, I think it's safe to say an unprecedented number of 287Gs were just signed in the past year, just kind of staggering number. And of course, that adds quite a. Those are the agreements that allow local officers. Yeah, not even they're not just bringing back 287Gs, but they're bringing back the ones where officers are actually out doing immigration enforcement or can be deputized to do immigration enforcement, the more collaborative ones. Whereas before they were kind of doing paperwork for ICE, which was bad enough. And there are plenty of local police departments that I'm sure are happy to do that. But the really, I think the other major disturbing story, I totally agree with you about the funding bill, but the growth of, I don't know, unfortunately, I guess we have to call it this, Alligator Alcatraz, what they're calling the Cornhusker Clinker, whatever other stupid names they want to use for these facilities. But these are state-run facilities, and I'm not even clear, even now, there's no transparency in any of this, even less transparency than what you usually have. But I thought you of all people would know maybe what's going on right now with all of this and what we know from the inside.
4 of them and this strange alliteration happening. So like Louisiana, Nebraska, Indiana, Florida. I mean, to me, Florida is really like central to what's happening with this administration. Like, I think about these different moments on immigration, and, you know, the Obama years were about Arizona. The recent Biden years were really about Texas. Like, Texas played such a big role.
Yeah.
And right now, Florida is just kind of the testing ground for everything. Let's make everybody have 287G agreements. All of these county jails now have agreements with ICE to detain people. We're going to have these different experiments where the state is now like building, you know, the Everglades detention camp, or what they're calling Alligator Alcatraz, that then is like being sent to other parts of the country, right? It's like, here, let's start this thing here and then like go elsewhere. And I think with these state prisons, I mean, one of the things that's so challenging, and what you're just talking about, Matt, in terms of like, where is our leverage? And so the thing that we learned for so long was like, actually, our leverage is more at the local level. We can, you know, pressure county commissioners, county councils, even state legislators to some degree, depending on where you are. And like 7 states have passed anti-detention legislation. So like we've seen some significant movement there. But in the context of these states, like there's really, like the levers are very limited. I think at least in the case of the Everglades detention camp, like some of it's litigation. Like this is why we actually need to still have a legal strategy.
That didn't get stopped. I thought that got like
briefly.
It's kind of, it's like all these things are, it's like the Guantanamo stuff, like that didn't really go anywhere because they actually don't have the ability to do what they were claiming to do there. But all these things kind of like, you know, some of them have kind of stayed, some of them keep going. And I think with these particular state facilities, so that's, you know, there's all these distinctions between different types of county jails. Private prisons are like what it's mostly been. Now it's like state prisons. And I think with them, they're short-term contracts. So this is the thing I'll say, is that many of them are 1-year contracts. So they're not like necessarily long-term. And I think this is what we always have to think about with these. It's like, how permanent is this going to be? And, you know, they're using Angola in Louisiana, which has a very long, disturbing history in terms of mass incarceration. And I think from my perspective, there's not a lot of levers here. I think maybe there's some litigation in the Florida example because of the location and because there's environmental concerns. But beyond that, I think for the most part, our work is to just really expose and try to do everything we can to make sure those contracts don't continue after that year. And like, I think it's like really hard whenever you get to a place when you're starting to win campaigns and have really clear strategy. And now you're kind of back in the raising awareness stage. And I kind of feel like that's where we are. Like, this is the time for political education. This is time for raising awareness. Like, let's learn about what's happening in these places. Where can we throw the wrenches? And there's some places like Leavenworth, Kansas, there's, you know, a prison they're trying to turn into a detention center there. And there's like zoning and other like local strategies that have been successful. And so I think there's, it just really depends on the location and trying. And I think a lot of our work right now is to document and expose.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, do you have a sense, and I think I know the answer here, but a sense of the difference in the conditions in the Florida facility versus the very bad conditions in many other state or private run facilities? I
mean, the conditions are just terrible everywhere right now. Like they're like, everything's just heightened. I haven't like looked specifically at like those conditions in Florida versus other places. There's great reports out actually about other facilities in Florida that have been so horrifying.
Oh, sure.
One of the things to name, so like, you know, one of the first detention centers that really started detaining people in the early 80s, Haitians in particular, was the Chrome Detention Center. And then they have some other private prisons in Florida. So Chrome is in, you know, outside of Miami, and they have other private prisons in the area. And then like a federal prison. There's all these prisons being used in South Florida. And what they discovered is that actually, because it wasn't like Chrome is an ICE owned and operated facility, like they could just keep filling it. So it would be overcrowding more and more and more. Whereas the private prisons could be like, no, we're not going to take anyone else because we don't actually have room. So it's an interesting thing where I think everyone just makes the assumption that the private prisons are worse. But the reality is like all of them are bad. And you have these conditions in these both like state run or federal run or county level run, especially these county facilities. I mean, these are meant for short-term stays, a few days, maybe a couple weeks, and people spend months or years in them. They never step foot outside. So I think that's something to kind of like thinking about the conditions. I think there's just this assumption, like private prison companies, they're trying to, make their bottom line. So they're going to cut costs, but kind of everybody's doing that because ultimately, like, these counties are making money off of this. These other people, states are maybe making money off of this now. I mean, I think with the state stuff, so much of it is about these governors just trying to be like, look at us. We're supporting the Trump agenda. I think that's all that's happening there.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's, I think that is a very important point, that it's bad everywhere. There are no good immigration detention facilities. I've been to quite a lot of them myself. I'm sure you have too. There's just a particular horror in the Florida one, the Everglades one, just because it's just a black hole in a way that even regular detention isn't. And we still don't really even know what the legal status of some of these people is. The immigration courts refusing to even recognize that they're there. I mean, it's this to me, that I was very concerned this might be the future. That this is where we're going.
I'm very confused. I don't know what's happening there. I thought they stopped it, but then, like, are there people there? Are you saying we just don't know?
There was an order to shut it down on the environmental suit, but then I believe that was overruled shortly after, and it is still there.
It's still there.
That's what I know. So,
and I think this is such an important point, Matt, and it's interesting because when I think about the Obama years, probably one of the most important reforms that Obama implemented was creating the ICE locator system, which was like, for years before there was like a database to like find people in detention, nobody knew where their loved ones went. Like a lot of times people would come to Detention Watch Network because they would be like, we had a map, and people would be like, okay, how do I find my loved one? How do I find my client? Like, here's they are. I'll just start calling detention centers, see if I can find them.
Remember those days?
Yeah. Like, and now, I mean, and that was what was actually like, it was procedural, but it was significant, hugely significant. And so that, like, not having that information, I think you're absolutely right. This sort of like, I know people
they shut that down or something, or
no, it's still there.
It's still there.
Oh, you're saying not having the information before,
yeah.
Not having it, and the ICE locator system is there. But how much there's a question with these folks in the Everglades detention camp, or with these, like what information are we getting? Sometimes people are being transferred. The information's not updated.
It's way behind.
It's way behind.
Yeah. But I mean, it also says a lot that one of the best reforms of the Obama years was literally a system to find out where in the Gulag system somebody is. I mean, that's just like such a.
It really was huge, though.
I know. I agree. I agree as a practitioner. Yeah. No, I mean, but it's just kind of a sad comment that's one of the best things they were able to do was tell us where they were. Which I guess, that brings me to something I wanted to get into here. I was determined to talk to more activists and advocates. We talked to a lot of lawyers, obviously, on this show. And I really appreciate, I do a lot of work with organizers and activists, and I just really appreciate the perspective. And you've said some good things in your book about how we can't lawyer our way out of what's going on, especially right now, right? That it's going to require full press. It's going to require everybody. And obviously, lawyers have to do the things we have to do. I have lawyer brain. I'm just going to admit it. Like, I am stuck in lawyer brain. I am still like, I agree with you on just about everything. But my first programmed response to a lot of these things is, how do we fix this in court? How do we go to a judge? How do we talk to somebody who's going to be able to listen to do something about this in the legal system? And that's becoming less tenable than it was, but we're still getting wins, obviously, in court. But, how do you see, I guess, since we're a law podcast here, how do you see the role of lawyers in the system and, at this moment, and organizers, and how we can better work together?
Like the good lawyers or the evil lawyers, or both?
The ones who are willing to work with organizers. So I guess whether you think those are good or bad.
I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you all on this, because you are talking to lawyers all the time, and I'm curious what your, listeners think. I just really I think, Derica Purnell, who, is an activist and did a lot of work around BLM, has a book called Becoming Abolitionists. I think she wrote something like, we can't, outsource the resistance to lawyers.
That was
right.
The phrase. Yeah, love that.
And I think it's such a good point, because I think the default, I appreciate you having that default. You're a lawyer. From my perspective, this framework of movement lawyers, I have mixed feelings about it, because I think it's just a way to make lawyers feel good about themselves.
Yeah, that's legit.
And
you're not wrong.
And I'm just if you want to, this Kung Lee, who used to be at the Southern Center for Human Rights and has organized for many years, who was an amazing litigator. They were just like, being a good movement lawyer is just being a good lawyer. Like, just be good at your job and think of the thing that's gonna, like, I think one of the challenges, right, is that often lawyers will think about their client first and not think about the system. That's like the biggest challenge, right? So like, oh, I'm going to think about my client. I would much rather have my client on this, GPS monitoring system than be in detention. Of course, totally makes sense. But if you keep advocating for this other thing, all that happens is detention goes up and GPS monitoring goes up. So more people are in the dragnet, more people are in surveillance. And so not thinking about how the system works and operates to just kind of grow up on itself. And so I think that's an important part of being a quote unquote movement lawyer is like, think out, like, yes, understand that you're going to have to make arguments for your client. Like somebody like Mahmoud Khalil, of course it makes sense that they're going to make an argument that he's innocent. Of course it makes sense. But like in a broader context, let's talk about these kind of questions of criminality and innocence and how they're used against like large categories of people. And that's basically what we got. You go from, for many years, good immigrant versus bad immigrant. We're in the era of every immigrant is bad because we did that for so many years, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me, being a good lawyer is one, like what you're doing. Don't spend all your time with other lawyers. Like it's just like not
strong
actually
recommend.
Strong recommend. As somebody who spends a lot of time with lawyers. And I think I think there is this element of like, I would love to have more lawyers who are ready to kind of really strategically think about litigation strategies around these detention centers. Like there's not a lot of capacity because like those folks, like we don't have a lot of those folks, or yes, we need the direct service work, but I think we do need this like bigger picture thinking. Yeah. And it's been great because we have been working with folks we have a Communities Not Cages campaign, like sort of subgroup on these questions of environmental justice and litigation strategies and having like that sort of connection happen on these site fights. But are there more that we can do? Like, what are the different strategies we can, play out here? And I know there are some folks doing that, but the capacity is so limited. So yeah, I mean, in terms of movement lawyering, like be a good lawyer, don't be an asshole. Like show respect to organizers. I think there's, and likewise, I think there's like dismissal on both fronts, but, as I write in the book, like the most innovative strategies were when organizers and lawyers were working together. That's when we got to a place where deportations were coming down, like thinking up of DACA, thinking up of these strategies against 287G or secure communities. Like all of that was people coming together and working together.
Yeah, no, and I've certainly sensed the tension sometimes on both sides amongst my colleagues on the other side. And I understand how it happens. We sometimes, like, we all want the same thing at the end of the day. I mean, we really, well, I shouldn't say that, actually. I mean, I think there are actually a lot of lawyers who are perfectly fine with detention remaining pretty much as it is, to be honest, or at least maybe reducing detention.
Well, that was probably one of the, when going back to the question about the site fights, like, that was one of our biggest challenges where I was on the phone with lawyers when they were trying to end detention in New Jersey at the Hudson County Jail in particular. I remember a lawyer like who had been given funding to provide legal service provision at the jail was like, we don't have enough detention in New Jersey. And it was like, there was this, it's like,
that's real.
And that's sort of what happened. It's like this social service provision then makes them think it's this framework that James Kilgore calls carceral humanism. Like, oh, the jail, we can provide services at the jail. Therefore we should keep the jail. And sometimes lawyers start thinking that way, right? And we have to push back.
It's an incredible thing to say out loud, but I can see how you get there. Like I can see how that happens. But yeah, no, I do think.
Well, I remember. I mean, I worked for CDCR for a while in the budgets before all this life, and I remember there's a kind of a contradiction where, it is like 2014, 15, 16, and as as more and more people were talking about like abolishing private prisons and all that on the end that I was working in, I just did data stuff. I wasn't part of it. But like around the office, it was like, well, the prisons have been so overcrowded that California doesn't allow private prisons, but because the courts had ordered like the conditions are too bad, you have to do something. Then we had to like contract with private prisons to do more beds to alleviate the overcrowding and the bad conditions. And it was just a weird feeling for me to be like, what is the right answer for who in that moment? Where it's like, oftentimes I feel like these systems have just led themselves to these awful dead ends where it's like,
Yeah.
well, you can't keep them overcrowded. That's bad. But then there's nobody on that end that has any control over how many people are being put in prison. Like, there's zero control over that. So it's like, okay, I guess the solution is contract with these private prisons to alleviate those conditions, I guess. And it's like, it's this weird thing where this system has gotten so big and unwieldy that it's like oftentimes I think people can't get out of it, or even if they wanted to, I don't know. It's like, what is the right answer in a question like that? It's like it's like the source. We need to be incarcerating fewer people, in order to get ahead of that. But then which end of it? I know you've talked about like building the prisons or building the detention centers leads to more detention. It's like, where do you think it is the start of it? Is it the system that feeds back on itself, or what is really driving it? Where can we get at the source of the problem, I guess?
That's a great question. I mean, if you're talking about California, the sort of really important text for understanding how California came to have so many prisons and so many people in prison is Golden Gulag by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who's been a really important mentor to me, and thinker, which really gets at these questions about political economy. I mean, I think a lot of this is about, like, how does the US have an economy that isn't based on the military and prisons? Like, what does that look like, right? Like, so much of the investment is in these really harmful infrastructures. And it just grows upon itself constantly. Why it's called the military industrial complex, why it's called the prison industrial complex, right? And so I think everything you're saying is right. And it's also the reason why detention became a thing. So actually back in the 80s, when they were using all these federal prisons, but because of the war on drugs and because federal policy was getting worse and like tough on crime was happening, like the number of people in federal prisons and also jails and prisons across the country just started to skyrocket. The system was snowballing. So you had like so many more people inside, and Rudy Giuliani, who was working in the Justice Department at the time, came up with this plan to build like INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, their own detention centers. And so that was when we started to see ICE have more of its, or INS at the time, have more of its own detention centers in its own right. It was because federal policy was getting worse, more people were being funneled into the system, and it was harder for them to get out. Like, that's the other thing. There was this period of time where, they just, like, people used to leave prison and come back to prison. Like, that was a thing that was like, that happened. Like, there was, like, prison just looked very different in that time. And even people who went to jail, like, they would get out on bond and just be out and it would be fine. And that just became so much harder after those years. And so all these systems snowballed. And that precipitated detention becoming its own thing, So I think like everything you were saying just points to how much this is, to me, it's about the policy and of course the narratives that kind of like got us to the policy. And then on the flip side, you have the prison boom happening. So you have these counties or these states being like, or, like in Louisiana, like, oh, let's build a new prison because this is going to bring jobs. Like, it's
great for the economy.
People called it a recession-proof economy, right? Like, that was the framework. And this is like, especially post-Cold War in California, like, defense industry's gone down. What is the thing that we go to? Oh, we turn this Air Force base into a detention center now. So anyways, that's a lot of different things. There's a lot to say about what you were saying, but I think it's so central to these questions, and why it's worth going deep. Like, I think a lot of people are so like, this is just about racism. Yeah, it's about racism and xenophobia. Sure, absolutely. But it's also about how these political economies work. And the biggest challenge anytime we've done a site fight has been, hey, we're going to lose some revenue. Like, what does this mean? Or how are we going to, like, we're going to lose jobs, like, that's number one thing.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing happening in Massachusetts right now. And this kind of touches on something you mentioned in the book, and I know that you've been thinking about. Our only remaining county jail that holds us detainees in
right?
Plymouth. Yeah. It's home of Plymouth Rock, of everything, everything this country became in 1620. And I often, I've been to Plymouth so many times, and sometimes I'll just go over there and take a look at the rock. It's one of the most disappointing landmarks in America, just FYI.
Not worth going.
The town is nice. I nothing against Plymouth. But, there's an interesting thing happening where Massachusetts just set aside a pretty decent amount of money. So it's potentially going to go up to $10 million for immigrant legal defense. And our office was able to hire a lawyer to just take advantage of that grant, and they're not going to do any private work. They're just going to be working through that. I'm very, very happy that we're going to be able to give them the space to do that. But there's an interesting thing happening here where, and I know this is one place, and it might be one of the only places where I think that organizers and activists routinely clash, because I've been going to Plymouth for a long time. It's still 40 minutes south, and they used to have a facility in Boston. It was extra bad. It was from the Suffolk County Jail, and that closed actually because the ICE refused to even communicate with the county to what they were even doing in their own facility. It was really bad. But there are also a lot of pressure, obviously, from Boston activists. But, one of the ways they're justifying keeping Plymouth open is that they're going to redirect the $25 million that they get from Plymouth. They're going to try to redirect at least most of that back to immigrant legal defense, which does make a lot of sense. I know. It's loaded. And I will tell you, as an advocate, as an attorney, I'm also an advocate, but as an attorney, just thinking straight up logistically, Massachusetts is one of the best places in the country to file a habeas claim to get people out of custody, and Plymouth is the only place they're going to hold them in Massachusetts. Otherwise, you have to file that habeas claim while they're on their way north to New Hampshire or Maine, like within the first 30 minutes or so. Sometimes if we're an hour. I had a habeas. One of the first ones I filed under Trump was actually denied because it turned out the guy had. We tried to get them to prove this, but in 20 minutes, there's a difference of 20 minutes from when we filed it to when he'd crossed the New Hampshire border, right?
Wow.
So just in terms of having a place where we know we can get habeas relief, having a place that's reasonably close to families and attorneys and everything else, I'm struggling with it too, because it is so, I want to close every detention facility. I want everything out. And I know that every lawyer is probably having the same kind of conversation in every state about, well, what about the one right next to me? What about the one that could potentially pay for more funding?
No.
Right.
But it also, is convenience. There's no question. Like it would,
for the families too. It's not just us.
It's both. And I think it's, this has been probably the biggest tension. And I write about this in the case of New Jersey. And I think, so the thing I'll say is that we have data showing that by having a detention center in a particular place, like when the Adelanto Detention Center, Geo Group facility in Southern California, opened up in the region, in the Inland Empire region, the number of ICE arrests, like San Bernardino County, shot up to having the highest number of ICE arrests in the whole country. But it was also a different time. So like I think these aren't easy questions at all. And from my perspective, it's a question of priorities. Like at some point, I would love Plymouth to be shut down. Is that the priority right now? I don't know, like based on everything you're saying. And I think it's much better if like a lot of energy in Massachusetts goes to stopping a new detention center in New Hampshire, probably. Right. Like, so I think, and I say this because I do think we are in very different times where detention is just skyrocketing everywhere. In a case of new detention centers, I think we have to do everything to stop them. They're like, oh, we don't have detention in Maryland anymore, but we're going to start having detention now so lawyers can get closer. I think that's a bad idea. Like ultimately, whenever you have the facility in the area, it's easier for them to detain people and put them in deportation proceedings regardless. And that is true for Plymouth. But in the context of the conditions we are in, I'm not, like that's up to the community there. But, I think these questions of priorities but like doing that work to make sure more detention doesn't just go up elsewhere in New England at the same time, right?
Tough. I can't see anything else opening. I mean, we're certainly never going to allow private prison. We're not going to allow another county jail if we can possibly help it here. I just don't see it happening. But it can get so complex. And
these are not easy questions. No. But again, prioritize what's going to be best for the community, what's going to be best. I think one, like that was the biggest challenge about the New Jersey case, like I said, is that, literally these set of lawyers came together to write to the Hudson County, like commissioners, freeholders, whatever they called them at the time, to be like, we believe in abolish ICE, but keep this jail open. Like that seems problematic, right? Like that is not the way to go about it. So I don't know. I mean, I think also like gather data, like how many people are coming into Plymouth from the that region, how, like, what are like, I think just understanding the facility is so important to like knowing the impact it could have if it were to get shut down or if there were to be another facility in the area. Like, I think all that data is so important for us to know how best to protect as many people as possible.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, there's no easy answers. We're not going to solve it today, but I just wanted to talk about that because that is the one place I think that I've seen activists and lawyers butting heads the most. Is,
Absolutely.
These kinds of things.
And
I totally understand both sides, but
I've been on the like, it's always good to shut down detention.
Right.
I think right now I'm in a place of like, it's just growing everywhere. We just have to stop the new detention centers as much as possible.
Harm reduction, at this point, So in our last few minutes here, I want to talk to you a little bit about what abolition means to you. We have a lot of listeners very interested in this, and certainly I am, and Thomas is. But kind of in the context now, in a moment when the mainstream, it seems like maybe the mainstream Democratic position is edging toward, at least.
I wish more so.
A lot of them are saying it. They're using the words. I don't know if it's going to come out the same way in the funding bill, but just wanted to ask you kind of about what that looks like and leave us some hope here about what life after ICE in America could look like.
It's not an easy question because I think, in some ways it's easy. Like, just get rid of ICE. Like, we don't need to have an agency that's sole function is to arrest, detain, and deport immigrants. Like,
sure.
Let's just stop doing that. We didn't, yes, INS wasn't great, but it was like, it had a different purpose than just that. Yeah. It had different roles, which, are part of USCIS and CBP now, but like, ultimately, like, we don't have to have ICE agents. Like, things will probably be fine if we don't have ICE agents, right?
Better, yeah. And they also didn't see themselves as national security agents, which they are.
Where are Nazis going to get a job?
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
No.
Again, this is what it all comes back to, because this is ultimately, for me, abolition is about more than just shutting down,
of course,
prisons or, ending police or reducing police. Like, why are we in this place where we have so much investment in these sort of like security forces and imprisonment and deportation, and so little investment into things that would like actually make people feel safe and make people feel secure, like housing and healthcare and other resources? So to me, I think it's a bigger conversation, and, detention's kind of like, both detention and also immigration is kind of about everything. So it's like, there's this weird thing that happened for many years in the immigrant rights movement where it was like, everything in immigration is just about getting citizenship and then everything will be fine, which is just not true in any way. Like, it's connected to so much. It's connected to climate catastrophe. It's connected to US imperialism. It's connected to, social benefits, like so much stuff. And we all kind of have different ways of doing this work. And I work against enforcement, but I think from my perspective, like, abolish ICE. Yes, get rid of this agency. Why do we need to keep this agency? And even DHS, this framework of Homeland Security, has hurt us in so many ways. Could we move away from that? And I think people have talked about this before. Like, immigration used to be into the Department of Justice. Like, maybe it makes sense for immigration to be in the Department of Labor. Maybe it makes sense for immigration to be in a different place. Like, the thing is, like, what ICE and this Homeland Security narrative and this criminalization narrative has done is basically made immigration about public safety and national security. That's what it's about. That's like the idea. But that's a lie. Like, that's not really what immigration about. Immigration is about family relationships, of course. It's about, seeking refuge. Like, those are the things that people think of, but it's about labor. Like, that's ultimately what it's about.
No, that's actually, that's something I always tell my students on the first day is, you can see the entire history of American immigration because we start with Department of Treasury because we understand that they're good for money. We go to Department of Labor because we know that they're workers. We go to Department of Justice because they might be criminals. We go to DHS because they're Homeland Security threats, right? There's just like this obvious through line through American history. And I completely agree that just like taking it back to a better agency, better model, and just the framework means so much, like the fundamental framework of how we see it. Yeah. It's such a good point. Any other closing thoughts? Anything that's giving you hope right now?
For the listeners, a very terrified look.
No,
deer in the headlights look of like, I didn't study for this test.
I'm really, yeah, no, I mean, it's been a really rough start to the year. I'm not gonna lie. I got to spend some time abroad. I had like a break from work last fall, and I got to spend some time abroad, and it really just like, it's like this is not everything that's happening, right? Like there's more that's going on in the world. And I think and a lot of people, I was at this conference and people were very like inspired in South Africa, and I was just like, this is great to be in a place where people feel inspired. And I do think ultimately, when I think about this moment, the thing that gives me hope is like, so many people are actually seeing this clearly. Like I'm in this space where last week I was on a conversation with DC types who are like, oh, well, we can't really say abolish ICE. This is so fragile. This is so whatever. Or, oh, we have to like hedge. And what if this happens? And, we might make the Republicans mad. I'm like, we have no control of the Republicans. Like we need to do the thing we need to do and have some vision. And I think a lot more people get that than like sometimes we think they do because of, like what the mainstream media is telling us. And so my hope is just like, yeah, like it's so many ordinary people. It's not, I work in this sort of civil society infrastructure, and we're like, and we're working a lot with like local communities, but like broadly, like from my perspective, the thing that's inspiring the most is ordinary people being like,
Yeah.
this is not okay in my community, and I'm going to figure out how to do something about it. And that is how we make change. And I want to do everything we can to foster that. So that's what's giving me hope and what's going to keep me going.
Same. Love it. Love to hear it. Well, thank you so much. It's great to have you on. I just really appreciate this conversation so much. And your book, of course, Unbuilt Walls, Why Immigration Requires Abolition. Oh, wait, did I get that right?
Why immigration needs
Needs
abolition.
Let me say that again.
I know. I'm like, it's like that thing. I'm like, it's been a year and a half since it'll come out. I was like,
I want to say it clearly. And of course, your book, Unbuilt Walls, Why Immigration Needs Abolition, which is a great read and really a really amazing resource for anybody trying to understand this whole issue in one place. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's nice to chat with y'all.
Yeah, you too.